Well, critics of the new regulatory model of Twin Peaks say it's going to cost companies a lot more. And you know what happens when things cost companies a lot more. They simply pass those costs on to you. That means consumers and investors all end up paying a lot more to be protected. So is it all really worthwhile? Cost perspective, Leanne Jackson, do you create a new layer of expense and cost to be the watchdog on my behalf of the financial sector?
Bruce, there's a lot of factors to think about in deciding whether this is going to cost more. We don't deny there will probably be some element of startup cost in setting up these new establishments. There are new powers. For example, the conduct supervision of transactional banking has never existed before.
Sorry, the conduct supervision of transactional banking has never existed.
So banks are very thoroughly regulated prudentially by the Reserve Bank historically in South Africa. Their conduct in relation to credit is regulated under the National Credit Act, and their conduct relating to giving financial advice, if they have brokers and so on, is regulated. But their actual conduct in relation to their ordinary transactional banks, the deposits and the savings account and the critical things you and I
we've been operating in blind faith, depositing money into
are not formally
into a
regulated. Yeah, so this is new. So there will be, we can't sit here and say there'll be no cost impact. But what's important to realize is what will the impact be if, assuming this regulation is effective, in ensuring that we help to drive down costs potentially of products, that we ensure that more appropriate products are being targeted to the right people. So I think one needs to also say, well, what are the intended benefits of the legislation before you just look at the costs? And then, sorry, just the other point I want to make is people have raised the argument, oh, now having two regulators is going to be more expensive than having one. Firstly, those regulators are largely still performing similar functions. But secondly, at the moment, there are far more regulators because you've got a different registrar for banks, for advice, for insurance, for pensions, for etc. And this framework actually seeks to rationalize and consolidate and avoid a lot of the duplication. So I think when financial institutions have made the comment that they see this is going to lead to a lot of costs, and we've said, well, where exactly? Particularly on the conduct side, we say, you know, we're adopting this very principles-based approach requiring you to treat your customers fairly. What about that is it that you are now not doing to such an extent that it's going to be an enormous cost for you to do it going forward?
It's an indictment,
and
yes.
I think it's an indictment, and I think it's also an anxiety about the change in the process. And
Ishmael, in your experiences, regulation in the world ever led to lower costs? We see something like the Free Market Foundation being very outspoken about this. I mean, they are more libertarian perhaps than most, but they are critical of this process.
The only people on earth who would argue that the financial system doesn't need regulation, the Free Market Foundation and Sarah Palin. I rest my case. I mean, seriously. The Free Market Foundation has put out stuff about how why is the new Financial Sector Conduct Authority and the Prudential Regulator, why are they going to have jurisdiction over insurers? AIG, Global Financial Crisis? I mean, really, do we have to have those debates? What we should be doing is we should be having debates about where Twin Peaks has failed in Australia and what are the things we need to look for.
What are the landmines we need to be aware of in South Africa? What do we need to be cognizant of so that we don't go down the slippery slope Australia appears to have done?
You need to have tough, if I may say, somewhat uncompromising, hard-assed, if need be, unpleasant people working for the regulator.
Well, but they're all like that there, aren't they, Leanne?
Absolutely.
Otherwise, you end up encountering what we call regulatory capture.
But okay, now capture is an interesting term because we've been through a process of state capture in South Africa. Your regulators, you would suggest, were too nice and were then engrossed within keeping the banking and financial sector in Australia happy rather than managing them and having this tension between them which should exist.
Yeah, you see, in South Africa, the term capture is associated with outright corruption. The regulatory theory on capture doesn't encompass corruption because that's just corruption. Regulatory capture includes things like regulators going soft on a bank because they see an opportunity for a lucrative job there afterwards. That's called the revolving door phenomenon. Or ideational and ideological capture, where you've got regulators who walk in and go, I believe that what's good for the banks is good for the country. Well, it might be, but it might not be. So we had a Productivity Commission report issued in Australia in January of this year that says that our prudential regulator has encouraged our banks to become a 4-bank oligopoly that are now the most profitable banks in the world and are sucking dry the productive capacity of the Australian economy.
How, Leanne Jackson, do we avoid that? We, for example, I mean, I don't think you'll have any say over audit because audit falls under different authorities, but we've had issues with South Africa's audit industry, and those have come to the fore in the last 6 months, starting with the SARS crisis and the way in which African Bank has been audited, and we've seen the audit of VBS Mutual Bank, for example, go bad, and real questions around KPMG and then Nkonki, both fired by Kimi Makweto, the Auditor General, this week. So we know the audit profession in South Africa is going through a deep dive into where things have gone wrong there. What stops this regulatory framework in South Africa from being captured in the Australian sense by the banking system? Whereas you talk about mutual respect and people, you know, we've worked together for years, there's always that risk of being a little bit too close. Do you need to have a more acerbic relationship perhaps with those you regulate?
Bruce, let's be clear, those risks have got nothing to do with Twin Peaks. Those are risks in any regulatory... Those are risks that exist in any relationship between regulator and industry. What our frameworks are strong on and are now even stronger on are the different checks and balances that are involved in holding the regulator to account. So I've spoken about the obligation on us being able to demonstrate and report on delivery of the outcomes, how successful are we being in the use of these new powers. And yes, there will always be a fine line to strike between being a preemptive and proactive regulator, and the term intrusive is an important one as well. It means getting in there and asking the hard questions. Sure. That relationship must not be overly adversarial from the get-go, but it's not friends.
Okay.
Right?
No, and that's an important distinction. Anish Muller, are we, people watching this program, am I better off as a South African consumer of financial services today than I was on the 31st of March, courtesy of the regulatory environment?
Unquestionably. Without question. You are protected comprehensively across every financial product and every financial service. You're protected by a new agency that is goal-orientated purely to ensure your protection.
And we need to keep an eye on them to make sure that they don't become too chummy with the people they're meant to regulate. That's our biggest risk in this.
You know, South Africans are quite good at that. They're quite good at kind of shouting at people who they don't think are doing a good job. Australians are very conflict averse, so they kind of... We need a bit more shouting and a bit more kind of pointing fingers, and God knows, maybe then our regulators might actually wake up.
We do get shouted at often, Bruce, I assure you.
Well, that's good to know. Good to know.
I assure you.
And we won't be doing that this evening. Thank you very much, both of you, for coming in. And he got a bit of an Australian twang there toward the end, just to prove that he does live there. That's where we leave it for this week. Thanks to our guests and to you for watching this evening. You can talk to us via Twitter. The handle for that is @ENCA, or @Bruce Business directly to me using the hashtag ENCA Taking Stock. Until next time, you are protected. Till next time, bye-bye.